Okay, so this chapter is all about product design and all about some of the decisions involved with product design internationally. Now, we've already kind of talked quite a bit about this subject. We know that if we move our retailer, such as Target, into a new market, we've got to adapt the product range. We know that American-sized appliances are not going to fit into UK-sized kitchens. So we know that we have to adapt our product and product tastes for new markets. Now, having said that, there is a balance there. There's a balance between adaptation and standardizations. Certain things you want standardized. If you have a global segment of business users for a certain cell phone app, your adaptation is going to be very minor. It's going to be language adaptation. But anything that is strongly culturally based, food, events, maybe fashion, that's probably going to require a little bit of adaptation. So here's an example. This was Starbucks, and Starbucks in China actually adapts its product range. People don't drink as much coffee in China as they do in the US, so there's a lot more kind of teas, chocolate drinks. But they did launch their own coffee based with beans from local Chinese provinces. They made it a little bit sweeter, so it's a little bit more like hot chocolate. And another good thing for this is it enabled them, in the aftermath of the financial crisis in the early, 2010s, this allowed them to give a lower cost product portfolio for price sensitive Chinese consumers. This one's a little bit older. This is basically IKEA in the USA. When they first moved into the USA, they weren't a great success. The things were not US sized. A lot of their kind of products didn't fit, for example, US appliances. Things were too small. The customers bought flower vases thinking they were like things to drink out of. They were not competitive price-wise, and on the whole, the American consumers were not quite at that time. Now, they probably would be now, too familiar with this whole concept of flat pack furniture, getting a pack and then just kind of self-assembly. Another kind of, example is US car makers not doing so well in Japan. Just the real basics, like, I've always told you a lot of this class is kind of common sense. In Japan, like the UK, they drive on the left, so the steering wheel needs to be on the opposite side. They produce kind of a boxy SUV, but I think it was mentioned in the book that in Japan, limited parking, small parking spaces, and to actually get a car, it has to be certified to fit into your parking space. So already they kind of limited their market. In addition, Japanese consumers have slightly different design preferences. If you remember, like the Nissan Cube, which is a terribly ugly car, that was kind of that traditional Japanese boxy design, which on the whole US consumers do appreciate. So our friend Walmart again, always just messing up. Here we are, American football's in Brazil. They moved into Argentina and they had the wrong types of steaks for Argentinian consumers, and Argentinians are very proud about their steaks, and they just generally messed up overall. But the thing is, Walmart can do this. They move into a lot of different markets, they build a presence, they cross-subsidize from the US, and eventually they're going to be successful. So this is an example. This is like Oreos in China. Importance of marketing research. Initially did their market research to Chinese consumer tastes, found preferred less sweet cookies, so developed a range of Oreo cookies, and also adapted for the popularity of flakes and also straws. Okay, this was a bit of fun from when I taught this in class. So here's a couple of other examples of adaptation. I won't spend too much time. This is adaptation of TV shows. And this was interesting because The Office, the first series in the US, didn't really work because they tried to transfer maybe a British sense of humor to the US. But kind of after a few seasons, once they developed their own material, it was a very successful TV show. This is the Kumars at number 42. This is like a British Indian family who kind of... It's like an interview TV show where the celebrities come in and interview with the family, and they attempted a similar one with a Mexican-American family called the Ortegas, but I think this never actually got past the pilot. And this is my favourite because it's my hometown, and this was Shameless, that went from Manchester to Chicago. Okay, so let's just kind of think a little bit about why, the forces of standardization versus customization. We've already talked a lot about consumer convergence. We've got young millennial consumers, similar tastes throughout the world, so there's common customer needs. We have global customers. I used to work for, and this is particularly true in the business-to-business sphere, I used to work for Dow Jones, and we used to sell news products like internet news products, and we would generally, a lot of our customers would be things like Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, the big kind of investment banks, and they had a global presence and they wanted similar things all over the world. Economies of scale, or scale economies, as economists like to put it, basically, and with kind of new flexible manufacturing methods, there's much less of a trade-off these days. We can kind of have relatively small kind of runs of products and still be relatively efficient. Increasingly, I think I've mentioned this before, it takes less time to get products to market. If you think about maybe the 1930s, 40s, maybe the 50s and 60s, color TV came out in the US. It took years to get to Europe and then years to other areas of the world. A new technology comes out. We now have global channels. It's almost instantaneous, or at least over a period of months rather than years. And finally, regional market agreements like the EU we talked about earlier in class, where we have companies can actually, because of these regional market agreements, for example, a company in Italy can consider the whole of Europe to be their home market. Okay, so here's just a few fun examples. So this is the Pepsi Max, which is supposedly, diet soda doesn't taste that great. So this was supposedly a new kind of tasty diet soda and was released all over the world. Though the Pepsi Max you get in the US is a little bit weird. It's slightly different from other Pepsi Maxes. But the whole idea was a better tasting diet soda. And they thought there'd be, a need from consumers all over the world. Compact cars. You notice that the US has never had a large compact car segment. But with more people kind of, focus on city living for a period, higher gas prices, this segment of cars, people who kind of living in densely packed cities, who don't want a huge car, who are living in maybe apartments with small parking spaces, this again is kind of a common need. And I'm getting a little bit out of date here. Here's kind of the, the iPlayer. And again, there's a common customer need for people to be able to download music and play it on the go. And finally, again, GPS, everybody has navigation needs. So there was a general common need for GPSs all over the world. And increasingly, that's become the domain of cell phone GPSs. And I said global customers, so just to give you an example. If you have business-to-business client relationships across countries, and my example is Dow Jones, who work with these banks all over the world, and we generally have customer systems can give us this kind of global view of customer relationships. If I'm dealing with Merrill Lynch in the US, I want to also know what they're buying they're buying from us in Europe, so we could possibly package a global discounting and global deal. So economies of scale, as I said, increased sourcing and efficiencies, lower research and development costs as development has been increasingly globalized. I gave the example in an earlier class of kind of a washing powder, and it had different innovations from all over the world. So global R&D leads to lower costs and economies of scale. And as I said, flexible manufacturing, that we can now knock up products a lot easier, and this may mitigate some of the problems of economies of scale. Okay, so there's this. I said there's no one. It's very hard to say, and I won't ask multiple choice questions. I adapt a product or I standardize the product. But generally, something, for example, like, fashion, where there's quite strongly different consumer preferences. If you think of something like, cultural differences, where we have, for a car, where we have more a culture with an extended family, may need to be able to fit, for example, 5 or 6 people in the car. Competitive environment. We need to be able to have something unique to compete in a local competition. And also, just general managerial focus on producing a nice product for a nice market. And I think we've already talked about different environments also having different adaptations. If you think of, for example, a car sold in Scandinavia is going to have slightly different features from something sold in a hot country. There's going to be more focus on heating rather than air conditioning. Maybe they'd have a different kind of set of cold weather wipers or special cold weather adaptations to keep the battery warm and be able to start in sub-zero temperatures. I noticed, for example, when I visit Wisconsin, I utilize the windscreen washer I buy down here, and it's absolutely hopeless. It just freezes in winter. So environment actually is one of these things. Okay, so I'll just kind of show you a few examples. We're now on to kind of modular design, and I'll give you a few examples of that. Okay, so let's just have a look at some of the different modular design strategies. So what's the modular design strategy? Well, furniture is the example of modular design. The kind of classic example where you have a lot of different components and together you can make kind of a range of configurations. So any sort of like kitchen system or kind of bathroom system will usually have a large number of components that you will fit together to create a coherent bathroom. So here's just some examples of like modular design. Another example of modular design is software components. When you build new software, quite often, you want, say I'm doing business software, I want a database, I want a calendar, I want kind of a memo section. There's a lot of kind of standard things that are in most software. So I can actually go and I can buy some software components and integrate it into my systems. So say, for example, I want to deal with PDFs in my software, then I've got something to convert HTML to PDFs. And I've got a range of different kind of PDF components. So the whole idea is it just makes development a lot quicker. Another strategy is a core platform strategy. I think we've already mentioned this. So this is an example from Ford. This is their kind of core development platform for their subcompact cars. So they have a very similar manufacturing lines, but they adapt it slightly for different products. So here we have basically when a car gets assembled, the engine gets put in. We have this product line is suitable for the Ford EcoSport, the Fiesta, and also some of the kind of the mini SUVs. So Ford will have different platforms and it will have a different range of vehicles for each platform, which again improves efficiency. Okay, and the final little thing we'll just mention in this section is that when you standardize versus customize, you can usually do some sort of calculations, to work out whether it would actually break even. So you'd kind of try to predict, how much you're going to sell, which is not an easy task in the host market. I do a lot of like market prediction, and you will kind of then work out the cost of adaptation, but versus how much extra profit you will make from making that adaptation. Now, one way you can do that, and I'm not going to include the I sometimes, if I've taught this in person, I'll do some calculations, but we don't really have time for that this semester. But just be aware, we have this thing called break-even analysis, which we can actually utilize to determine whether or not to customize our products. Okay, so we'll skip that. I will talk a little bit about why people adapt new products. So why do products diffuse internationally, and how some products are successes and some products are failures. Now, Obviously, this will depend on preferences. It will depend on influences. To give an example, if we have a computer console, I might like a certain console. I might prefer the PlayStation over the Xbox. Maybe it's got better graphics. Maybe I think it looks nicer. But it will also depend on what if I'm playing with my friends, it will also depend what my friends also buy. I don't want to have an Xbox and all my friends have a PlayStation. Okay, so just to give an example of multinational confusion, we'll stick with consoles. So the original Xbox had very good sales in the US, but it didn't diffuse very well in the Europe and Japan. And it's maybe because it was in Japan. It was not a Japanese company, but it was kind of a segment similar to PC gamers, and it was aiming from a slightly different segment from the console video market, which that segment was maybe not quite as big in Japan, which is very much home of the consoles, or in Europe. And here's just like an example of handset penetration. So, and this is a little bit out of date, but this is like the 3G handsets, and you can see that that this was kind of Japan was the lead market on this, followed by Western Europe, North America, and then the other regions of the world. So let's go look back a little bit and think, you know, what makes a product adapted? And these things are relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, trialability, and observability. I'll give you an example of each. So, the first example was GPS. Yes, GPS has relative advantage over maps. It's much easier to use. You don't have to buy like lots of different maps. If you go to different places, you can go somewhere on a whim without worrying about navigation. So GPS had relative advantage. And then for the average user, cell phone GPS had a relative advantage over dedicated GPS. Microsoft has, whenever it releases a new operating system, and in fact Windows 10 might be its final operating system, it's doing incremental advantages, you generally say, for me to adapt a new operating system, does it have any advantages over the previous operating system, in this case Windows 8. Compatibility. So is a product compatible with the values and attitudes of a certain country? So this is a Hummer. And if you're kind of in a country that, say for example Scandinavia, a more feminine culture, where ostentatious showing off is not considered a good thing, where there's much stronger emphasis on environmental friendliness, then this would not be compatible with the culture. We also need to think whether or not there are going to be any switching, another aspect of compatibility, any switching costs to go to a product. So if we have, for example, we move from, and this is going back a long way, if we move from CDs to DVDs, don't laugh, for our music, then we have all our old music on CDs, so there would be a switching cost to move to DVDs. Now, of course, when MP3 players came along, there was no switching cost because you could upload your DVD music into the cloud and then kind of have them with you on your player. And it's the same with any operating system or console. When the next PlayStation comes out, it may or may not be compatible with the games from the previous generation. If it's not compatible, then there are going to be switching costs for buying new games. So complexity. Is the product easy to understand? So this is just a little example of this modular kind of fuel can, which is like a really nice, like easy to use but practical piece of equipment. But sometimes things are not particularly usable, and that's why most products go through usability testing. For example, Walmart every year, they will actually have a big testing where they open a store to kids and have them test kids' toys for their Christmas product range, because again, that's a form of usability testing to see which toys kids find easy to understand and easy to use. Computer software has a phase of user testing. Same with websites. If I develop a new website, I want to make sure that the website is relatively easy to use. So I will run it with some test customers. I can also utilize kind of and we have some of the equipment here in Mississippi State, I can also kind of utilize eye scanning fMRI to see how I, how I adapt to a new website or a new product. Trialability. So I've given some examples of trialability. You can actually trial when you get computer software. You get it free for 30 days and you've got to buy it. So you've essentially got a 30-day trial. Most consumer products will give you free sample packages to try. So again, a trial. Quite often you could rent a computer or rent a PC, again, as a trial. And imagine I want to go on holiday, I want a new apartment, but I don't know quite what the experience is. I could actually use a virtual reality or a 3D view of what I'm going to see, so I can almost trial it before I utilize it. And finally, observability. We need to see, for observability, it just means that the user needs to see benefits from the product. So maybe I have a set of fitness program, and I want to observe what's happening. Maybe I have apps that measure my heart rate, measure my weight, so I can observe the success of my product. That's an example of observability. Okay, so that was video